Hello. Today is Friday, February 12th, 2016, and it's time for Friday's Flashback. This is a little something we do at times of refreshing, where on a Friday, every Friday, we flashback and we find some good teaching or some good quote from one of the great Christian teachers, preachers, writers from the past. Today, I'm going back to the book Azusa Street, which was originally titled Another Wave Rolls In by Frank Bartleman, who was a journalist and a preacher who was out near in the San Francisco area, and then he was down in LA, Pasadena, all along the California area out there near the coast. He was there in 1906 when the great Azusa Street revival broke out with signs, wonders, miracles, many salvations. People came from all over the world for 3 years steadily. Services were held every single day at that time. People came from all over the world to see what was happening there, and a lot of them took it back out with them to India, to Europe, to Wales, to Russia, all over the place. A lot of your big Pentecostal churches, the Assemblies of God definitely, and a few other denominations like that started here at Azusa Street, had their roots here. Frank Bartleman was there when it started, and as a journalist, he documented it very well, kept a diary every day of what happened at this great revival. He said some really cool stuff that I thought I'd like to read to you. He says here, this is my book, I've highlighted so much of it, I'm just going to read you a little bit. He talked about the fact that the great moves of God, the great revivals, have tended to start in places that nobody expected. They didn't start in the big cathedrals or the big fancy churches. They usually started in an out-of-the-way place with people you didn't expect. The Azusa Street revival started with some people having a prayer meeting at a little house on Bonnie Bray Street. And that was in California and in the Los Angeles, Pasadena area. I don't know my geography real well with that area. And when the house got too full, they had to move to like a 2-story warehouse, old beat-up place on Azusa Street. And that's where they stayed for several years after that. 3 years, it was hot and heavy. And it was an unusual revival because there were no holds barred with who could lead or who could preach or who could lay hands on the sick and they'd recover. It might be a white person, a black person, a Hispanic person. And this is 1906. They didn't worship together. Different people from different cultures or races back then. And you might have a man who delivered the message. You might have a woman. You might have an old person. You might have a child. It was whomever the Lord would use. And that's what made Azusa Street so unusual for that time and that place. Here's what Frank Bartleman said. He wrote this in his diary at that time. Some churches are going to be surprised to find God passing them by. He will work in channels where they will yield to Him. They must humble themselves for Him to come. Some people are too well satisfied with their own goodness. They have little faith or interest for the salvation of others. God will humble them by passing them by. The Spirit is breathing prayer through us for a mighty general outpouring. Great things are coming. We are asking largely that our joy may be full. God is moving. We are praying for the churches and their pastors. The Lord will visit those willing to yield to Him. And the final quote that goes with that, he wrote this in his diary as well. We may cut ourselves off from God by our spiritual pride, while He may cause the weakest to repent and go through to victory. The work in our own hearts must go deeper than we have ever experienced. Deep enough to destroy sectarian prejudice, party spirit, etc. on all sides. God can perfect those whom He chooses. Just what I said. God did a work in Azusa through the people He chose. He can perfect whom He chooses, and it may not be who you or I think he's going to choose. You know, the bishops here and the pastors here, the seminary graduates here. God may choose to do his great outpouring, his great revivals, his great works through people without a seminary degree, with people who haven't been ordained in some system of man. He worked at Azusa Street through often children, teenagers. God will perfect those whom he will for his great work. All it requires is somebody humble enough to yield to him and say, use me, Lord. I may not have the credentials of other people, but use me, Lord. There's an old saying, somebody said it the other night at the well at one of our services. He doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. That could be you. That could be me. Whoever's willing to yield to him. That is your Friday's flashback from the book Azusa Street by Frank Bartleman. I hope you got a little nugget of truth from that encourages you. Friday's flashback. See you soon.